If God is for you, who can be against you? Someday we will spend eternity in heaven where there is no suffering and no pain and no sorrow and no shame and no sadness. So just stay close to Jesus. Remember how loved you are. And let's all just remember to pray for one another. So make sure that you pray and just trust in the Lord during this time, because the spiritual battle, I feel, is about to get worse. And I think that we're really entering into a time of judgment. So God is really crying out, and it's time for us to pay attention. The question is, are you paying attention? Are you listening? And are you not only listening, but are you receptive to the voice of the Holy Spirit? Or are you letting your flesh lead you through each and every day? This is very important. I can't think of a more important, interesting, spiritual time to live in. One more thing I want to mention, I want to tell everyone, thank you so much who has been blessing me and giving gifts to this ministry. I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. And I apologize if by me putting little messages on the screen, if it comes across like I'm trying to be pushy or beg for money. I do not mean it that way. It's the only way I can do what I'm doing right now. My videos are mostly all demonetized by YouTube because they're offensive and they are not advertiser friendly. So the only way I can continue doing what I'm doing as much as I do is by the gifts of love that is given to this ministry. So thank you so much to everyone who has been giving. All of that information will be posted right below the video. So if God moves you to do that, then that's how you can do it. Please be prayerful about it. I don't want anyone to feel pushed into giving or to feel like you have a guilt trip into giving. I see preachers and people do that, and I disagree with that. Only give to this ministry if God leads you to do that. And please pray as you do it, and know that I pray over all of the gifts I receive that God blesses you abundantly. Now, I will go ahead and share the news. This is Lynn Liaz, and I have with me tonight Professor Danny Faulkner with Answers in Genesis, and we are going to discuss something I have not really done any videos about, but tonight I'm going to, and that is about the flat earth theory. I get a lot of comments about that beneath other videos on my channel. So I thought I would talk to Professor Danny Faulkner about this because he actually just went to a big conference and talked about it, and he has a lot of knowledge on this. I wanted to share that knowledge with my listeners and anyone else who stumbles upon this video. Professor Danny, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate having you on my show. It's been a while.
It's good to be back.
Thank you for that. So about this whole flat earth theory, and you went to this conference and you talked about it. When do you think that all of this originated, and what is the basis of the flat earthers? I guess that's what they're called, the people who believe in this theory. What is the basis of their belief in this mainly?
Yeah, let me say right off, I do use the term flat earther, and I don't mean anything pejorative by it. Sometimes people throw that term around, but I've discovered that people who believe flat earth often refer to themselves and each other as flat earthers. So when I use that term, please, anybody listening, do not think that I'm being pejorative. It's being descriptive. I think it's a good term, and I don't mean anything negative by that. The flat earth idea really was kind of unleashed on the world just a few years ago, largely through the internet and social media. And it's spread really quite a bit by YouTube videos. I've been watching this movement now for going on 2 years. It was February of 2016 that I first became aware of this. It was trending. I had seen little hints of it before. I hadn't put it together. That back in February 2016, in less than a week, I had conversations with 3 different individuals who had concerns about young people that were getting into this. I thought, I need to find out what's going on. And since then, in talking to people here at Answers in Genesis, some of our speakers, and to other creation ministries, there's been a sharp increase in inquiries, people emailing, sometimes people asking speakers out on the road. We've had people here at Answers in Genesis at the Creation Museum ask about it. So it requires a response. And most people, when they hear questions about flat Earth, they roll their eyes, they get disgusted, they get angry, they think it's the most ridiculous, stupid thing they ever heard, and they just can't believe we're having this discussion. And what I found is that people ask these questions, they say, well, how do you explain this? They've picked up some arguments they've seen on the internet, and the people who are dismissing flat Earth can't answer the question, and they get more angry, and it really just spirals downward from there. And these people are asking a very good epistemological question. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It's basically the question of how do you know what you know. And I guess I'm sensitive to this because I've been doing this for more than 30 years. Back in the 80s, when I first started teaching astronomy classes, I encountered pretty clearly that most people have no idea of the history of man's understanding of the shape of the Earth. We've got a lot of mythology about this that's wrong. And also, they don't have good reasons for understanding that the Earth is spherical. So in my classes teaching astronomy, I would do a lot of history of astronomy, which I love history, and kind of combine it with astronomy. It's great. And also it gets down to some of the nuts and bolts of the aspects of the sky and so forth. And so I would ask my students over the years I was teaching at the university, well, what shape is the Earth? And they'd say, well, a sphere. And I'd say, okay, well, how do you know that? And blank looks. And, finally somebody would say, well, we got pictures from space. And I said, well, wait a minute, you could fake pictures from space, can't you? And, well, yeah, you could. They've seen fake pictures, of course. And on top of that, we've only been getting pictures from space for a little over 60 years. So consequently, people knew the Earth was spherical before that. So how do they know? And people draw a complete blank. They've never been challenged with this kind of question. And this is really great philosophy. And so I applaud flat earthers in that aspect. They're really getting down to a very good teachable moment. Now, I think they go the wrong direction with it, but it is a very good question to ask, and it's a good exercise to go through. And I think part of this movement and the success movement is playing off of a couple of misconceptions that we have. I've already alluded to this. One misconception is that we grew up hearing that everybody thought the world was flat until about 5 centuries ago, at the time of Columbus and a failing Columbus, maybe Magellan. And that was our mythology we grew up with. But in reality, people knew that the Earth was spherical for about 2,000 years before Columbus. The first mention we have in where the scientific literature goes back to Pythagoras in the 6th century BC. He knew the Earth was spherical. Aristotle wrote On the Heavens in around 350 BC, and I just reviewed this the other day, by the way. He very clearly taught that the Earth was spherical, and he gave several reasons why the Earth was spherical. Around 200 BC, a man named Eratosthenes knew that, and he actually measured the size of the Earth pretty accurately. And so it goes forward from there. Eratosthenes' work, Aristotle's work, later on Ptolemy in the early 2nd century AD, he set up the geocentric model. With the Ptolemaic model with explaining the motion of the planets. And this was dogma throughout the Middle Ages. And another misconception people have tied to this is everybody thinks that the Earth, people thought the Earth was flat, and that they believe the church taught it was flat until they were talked out of that about 5 centuries ago. And that's not the case. The church never taught that. People think that the Bible teaches that, and that's not true either. I don't think the Bible teaches that. Where did this notion come from? Where did this false history come about? Well, it came about in the 19th century, about 150 years ago. Skepticism and atheism were coming out in the open and being debated quite a bit. And there was this in the so-called Enlightenment, there was an attack being made against institutions, against the church, against Christianity. And so there arose this myth in the 19th century that the church had held back progress. We call this the conflict thesis. And the argument is that, the church taught the Earth was flat, and now the church has a way of redeeming itself by getting in on the ground floor of Darwinism. And this was a complete fabrication. 25 years ago, a medieval scholar named Jeffrey Burton Russell wrote a book, I think, called Inventing the Flat Earth. And it does a really good job of discussing how this whole sorry story came about in the 19th century. Well, unfortunately, there were some Christians in the 19th century who took this false narrative, this false history, and embraced it as their own and said, yeah, you're right. The Bible does teach the earth is flat. And one of these people is this guy named Samuel Rowbottom, who kind of kicked off the flat earth movement. He wrote a book and influenced a few other people. A guy named Carpenter and a few others came along in the end of the 19th century. And that's how the flat earth movement really got started. It was in the 19th century, kind of petered out in the early 20th century. And so a few years ago, I think some modern people on the internet kind of resurrected, stumbled across Rowbottom's work and Carpenter's work and a few others, and kind of reintroduced it to the world. But I can't be more emphatic about it. And a person who studies the history of this will come to realize that this notion that the Bible and Christianity and the church have taught that the world was flat, that really goes back only 150 years. It's a fairly recent novelty.
Interesting. Very interesting to hear the background on all of this, because I didn't know these things. And some of the examples you gave about what people would say who support that the earth is round are the very things I would say. And then if somebody asked me, how do you know? I would say the same thing. So it's interesting to know that information.
Well, let me share with you a couple of reasons that people had. I just kind of glossed over that, but Pythagoras noticed that during a lunar eclipse of any kind, total or partial, the shape of the Earth's shadow is a circle. Now, the shadow of the Earth is, we call it the umbra, is actually larger than the moon, so you can't see the whole thing at one time. You can see part of it, the beginning, part of the end, but it's always a section of a circle. And if you fill it in, it's a very, very clearly as a circle. Now, this relies figuring out a couple of things. It relies upon the fact you know what causes a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is when the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, so therefore the Earth's shadow falls on the moon. It's pretty obvious that the moon orbits around the Earth once a month. That was known in ancient world. And an eclipse only a lunar eclipse only occurs when the moon is full, and that occurs when the moon is opposite the sky from the sun. They're 180 degrees apart at that point. And so it's pretty easy to understand that the Earth is slipped in between the two at that point. By the way, we don't get an eclipse every full moon, which happens once a month, because the moon's orbit around the Earth is tilted by about 5.5 degrees, and so usually it passes above or below where it needs to be for the Earth's shadow to fall on it. Now, the point is, around flat Earth, which is what the flat earthers today are proposing as the model of the Earth, could cast a circular shadow if it occurs at midnight, say close to the tropics, with the sun directly below and the moon directly above. But at high latitudes, temperate latitudes, it wouldn't quite be a circle. And also, certainly at sunrise and sunset, it would not be, because then it would be kind of a line or an ellipse or something. That's never the case. The only shape that casts a circular shadow, regardless of its orientation, is a sphere. Another argument that they used was, as people did travel quite a bit, as they traveled northward and southward, they noticed that the stars in the north get higher in the sky as you travel northward, and stars in the south get lower, and vice versa. As you travel southward, the reverse happens. And not only just to get higher and lower, but they actually disappear below the horizon. And this is something the average person, if you pay attention to the sky, can see this. I certainly have seen it many times as I travel and make it a point to study it. I've been looking at the sky pretty seriously for a half century, and it's pretty obvious. And the only explanation you can have is that the Earth is spherical. Now, those are two pretty powerful arguments. Another one is that they realized that there was a time delay on events, like a lunar eclipse would happen in say the Middle East, maybe in Egypt, be happening when the moon rose at sunset, but over in Spain, it would rise already eclipsed, because it's a little later in the night there. Now, that means that the Earth is curved in the east-west direction. And the thing I just shared with you about moving north and south means that the Earth is curved in the north-south direction. So that suggests, again, it's a spherical shape that's going on here. These are pretty robust. There are some other arguments that were not as robust, but certainly were given. And these things were known from ancient times forward. So there were pretty good arguments from the ancient past. And again, arguments that people today can use. You don't have to rely upon NASA. You can do these things for yourself, do observations for yourself to see those.
Well, one question I had, and it's a verse that a lot of people use. In fact, I've even used it, and you and I discussed it before the show here. And I think it was a good one to point out. And it was Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. And that verse says, let me read the King James Version here. It says, "It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth." And there's more to that verse than that. If you go to Blue Letter Bible, it gives the transliteration of the Hebrew word CHUWG. And I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that because I will get it wrong. But if you scroll down, it says circle, comma, sphere, used of the arch or vault of the sky. So, how would you explain this verse to people, and what information or knowledge do you have about this transliteration of the Hebrew word for circle?
Well, I never studied Hebrew seriously as any kind of depth. I have used some of the resources. I usually call upon several people, and I know several people who know Hebrew very well. And when I ask them a question, I can be certain. I mean, they've gone to the best universities to learn Hebrew, some of them from the Hebrews themselves. And I think they are competent in these sorts of things. Look, I was told for decades by people in the creation circles that verse there refers to a spherical Earth, and so actually in Isaiah, like written eighth century or so BC, talking about the Earth being a sphere. Well, I was informed a few years ago that well, it's a little ambiguous. You know, you pointed out your reference Bible there was saying circle or sphere. Well, which is it? Well, maybe it's put down as both because it's a little ambiguous. It can go either way. And of course, in the last year and a half or so, I've been hearing flat earthers say, "Well, wait a minute. This does mean circle. Doesn't mean three-dimensional. It means a two-dimensional circle. Doesn't mean a sphere." And so I find it interesting that people on both sides use the same verse. And I scratch my head and say, wait a minute, how can they use both of them? So I'll go back to my Hebrew people again and say, yeah, the verse is ambiguous at best. It could be interpreted in terms of the spherical Earth. It could be interpreted in terms of a round, flat Earth. It's not a slam dunk either way. And it's one of these situations that I fear there's far too much certainty involved here. So it's a verse I really don't like to go to. I think it does indicate the Earth is spherical, but I don't think I can prove that, nor can anybody else. And they can't prove it doesn't. They can't prove it definitely means just a circle disc. So I'd love it for it to be that way, but I have to call it the way the Hebrew people I know tell me about it.
Yes, and that's about all you can do in order to present factual information, because that's, we can give our opinions on things, but we have to line things up with the fact. I mean, for example, I am not a flat earther. I believe the earth is round, as in a sphere. However, we have to go by the facts, and I love the facts that you're sharing with the people, because like I said, I've been seeing these comments about the flat earth over and over and over and over again. So it's nice to finally get some educated information on this subject from you, Professor Faulkner. Now, I did want to ask, what other arguments, if any, have you heard about this whole subject?
Oh, first of all, I've written on this several times. I've written 5 or 6 articles and blogged about it 3 times now. And it's all at our website, answersingenesis.org. If you go there, you can just look up flat Earth. But in some of those articles, I've actually done tests of these things. One of the big arguments that the flat earthers use is they refer to this, what's called a Nowicki photograph. He's a photographer. He went over in western Michigan at a state park, and he took a photograph did it more than once, by the way, of the Chicago skyline from across Lake Michigan, a distance of more than 50 miles away. And if the Earth is curved, the approximate formula for that is 8 inches per mile squared. And you do the calculations, you'll find the Willis Tower, formerly the Sears Tower, is well below the curvature of the Earth. So obviously, if you can see it, that must mean the Earth is not spherical. And so here you got this photograph showing this, and people say, well, how can you explain this? And this probably one photograph has convinced more people that the Earth is flat. However, you got to be careful, because Nowicki has taken a whole series of photographs. He's put them together in a time-lapse video. I've seen it on the internet, and the tower's up, the tower's down, the skyline's up, the skyline's down. It bounces up and down. Now, how do you explain that on a flat Earth? Well, you can't. But I can explain it on a spherical Earth Most of these photographs are taken, in fact, all of them are probably taken in spring and summer during warm weather, clear weather, but warm, and there's still cold water. And you get what's called a temperature inversion. And I won't go into all the physics here, but when you do that temperature inversion, you do bend light around the curvature of the Earth. And that explains why you can see things far beyond the horizon. The light actually bends around the edge of the Earth. Now, I did this experiment myself a little over a year ago, and I was in Virginia Beach. It was a very cool day. It was early November of last year. And I went to the beach. The air temperature was about 49 or 50, and the water temperature was in the 60s. So there was no temperature inversion. Most people don't want to do this on a raw, cold autumn or winter day, but you have to do this to do it right. And I took photographs with a 1200 millimeter telephoto lens of two different cargo ships. Now, one of them didn't go out far enough. It started getting towards sunset, but the other one did go out far enough. And as I did, you could see the whole of the ship gradually disappear. You could see then layer upon layer, I think there are 7 layers of containers. Those all disappeared. Eventually, all was left was the bridge castle. Now, this can't happen on a flat Earth, but it is what you expect to see on a spherical Earth. So I've done this test myself, and I find that if you do it when there is no temperature inversion, you will actually confirm that the Earth is spherical. If you do it on a spring and summer day when it's warm, you very likely will not be able to see that. You'll be able to see distant objects that are below the horizon, and if taken at face value, could possibly convince people that the Earth is flat. So you got to explain that away. I got to explain it, I should say. It's got a very natural, straightforward explanation. And I wrote that up. It's one of the I got the photographs there on display in one of the articles I've written. I've done some other tests as well. So I keep testing this. I keep coming up with tests, and every time I test it, I find the flat Earth model fails, and the spherical Earth model actually explains the results that we see.
Interesting. And it's interesting too that you have given it time to test it. You know, a lot of people just ignore it and dismiss it. But, you know, I have a lot of respect that you've tested this and talked to people and researched it so that you can give educated, accurate answers to people. And I think that's always very, very important, because we just toss an answer out there to people and we don't really know. And then that person who is in disagreement with us asks us more information as to why we feel this way. And we just say, well, I don't know, because I've seen pictures or something like that. We kind of don't give any credit to what we're saying when we do that. And we still have 10 minutes left. If you have any more information to share on this, you're welcome to share it.
I got plenty I can share. On the same vein, a number of years ago, we were vacationing in the Door Peninsula in Wisconsin. It sticks out into Lake Michigan. It divides Green Bay from Lake Michigan. And one day, my son and I went to the beach. It's a rocky beach. We're on the Green Bay side, and we stood at the beach, and it looked like open water. You couldn't see anything off in the distance. It was just water as far as you could see. And the shoreline to Michigan was about 20 miles, I was told. Looks like that on the map. Well, my son and I got in the car and we drove up. We didn't walk up. We drove up and went around, and there's these bluffs pretty high above that beach. We got up there and we had an overlook, and we looked out and we could see the tree line in Upper Michigan, the UP of Michigan across there. We couldn't see it from the beach, but we could see it from this elevation. Now, on a spherical Earth, that's exactly what you would expect to see, and we did see it. But on a flat Earth, that is not what you would expect to see. That requires explanation. I've taken the flat Earth model and I've applied some tests to it. And, some of the people out there that like flat Earth, they accuse me. I've seen them, responding to some things we have online about this, and they say, "Well, he hasn't tested this, obviously." Well, actually, I have many times. I'll explain one of them to you. I took their model, and the model, by the way, that most flat earthers have, is the Earth is a round, flat disk, and the North Pole of the Earth is at the center of that. And so the continents are laid out sort of like how the UN flag, remember what the UN flag looks like? You've got Australia really far from the center, the tip of South America in another direction really far from the center, and so forth. And then there's this big dome over top, and that dome rests upon this, what they call the ice wall of Antarctica. Antarctica is not a continent. Antarctica is this big wall of ice around us, and there are different debates about how far that ice extends, but there is no South Pole according to the flat Earth model. And this dome spins around every day. Um, and that's why the stars appear to spin around, and also why the sun and the moon seem to spin around. By the way, since you can draw a line between any spot on the flat Earth to any spot in that dome, that means that none of the stars, none of the sun, nor the moon, they don't rise or set. They're always above the horizon. And they try to argue that the sun is like a spotlight shining down, and what causes it to get dark at night is the sun is still above the horizon, except it's far away from you, and the spotlight isn't shining down on you. The problem is it's still above the horizon, and they try to say, well, perspective will make it appear to set. Well, I recently did a calculation. I took their model and I asked, well, how far away can the sun get from me, where I live here in Kentucky? And that would be on midnight on the winter solstice. We're coming up on that in another month here, and at the time we're recording this. And so I did the calculation. I took their numbers, took their model, and I computed. By the way, they say the moon and the sun are 32 miles in diameter and about 3,000 miles up. That's not everybody agrees with that in the flat Earth movement. That seems to be the dominant model. Well, when I did that, I took their numbers. I discovered that when the sun is as far away from me here in northern Kentucky as it can get, it's still going to be 15 degrees above the horizon. Now, perspective will not cause that to set. It will still be above the horizon. And stars will never set for me. And I've got news for you. I've been looking at the sky for a half century very seriously, and stars rise and set every night. And that's impossible on this model as well. I did an experiment last year. I went out, and it was in August, and I took a photograph of the sun when it was just getting above the trees here at Antis and Genesis. We have an observatory out back, so I set up the telescope and took a photograph of it. And then I waited until local noon, when the sun was as high as it could be in the sky. Instead of being like 8 or 10 degrees up, is over 60 degrees up. Now, if the sun is 3,000 miles up from me, then it's going to appear a lot smaller down near the horizon than it does when it's high in the sky. And I was able to compute on the model, on their numbers, again, not mine, their numbers and their model, that the sun would appear about 6 times larger when it was high overhead, and than it does when it's low in the sky. Well, I get the photographs out and I print them and I put them side by side, and they seem to have exactly the same diameter. Again, this disproves their model. Now, it turns out we're a little closer to the sun at noon than we are with anybody's model, but I happen to believe the sun is 93 million miles away. And if you take my numbers and that model and you calculate, you'll see there's the difference in size is inconsequential in the traditional model, where the sun is almost 1 million miles across and 93 million miles away. So that's another test I've applied. And I've applied other tests, and I've published these up. I put them on our website in different articles. So again, I keep doing tests. I do it again and again and again. And every time I do it, I end up showing that the results are not consistent with the flat Earth model, but they are consistent with the traditional understanding of cosmology. I might want to add again, I want to emphasize, as a student of the sky, not just book learning, but I've been, every night, usually before I go to bed at night, the last thing I do is I go out and look at the sky. When I get up in the morning, one of the first things I do is I go out and look at the sky again. I just like to look at the sky and check out where things are, where they are, what's going on. And anybody who's familiar with the hourly, daily, monthly, and annual cycles and how the sky looks different at different latitudes, anybody familiar with those things instantly would understand that you cannot explain this with the flat Earth model. You really cannot do that. And I think the people that are into flat Earth don't know this. I mean, they're not familiar with the sky. If they were familiar with the sky, they would understand this as well. And these amount to test or proofs of the model too. I mean, I'd love to, spend a few nights with some of these people out under the stars and point out the motions to them, let them see them for themselves, and show them how this does not work in their model.
Real quick, before we end the show, I am curious, when you went to this conference recently, what was the overall response of the people to what you had to say, particularly those who are what we're calling flat earthers? What was their response?
Well, I wasn't there to debate people. I made it a point I was not going to argue with them, and if they wanted to discuss it, then I was happy to do that. I was going to do it in private, not in front of a bunch of people. And I was a guest there. I went there to learn and to observe, and I didn't know what to expect. I really, my intention there was just to sit and not interact with anybody and not be noticed. If I could have not been noticed, that would have been great. Um, that's not the way I am. That's not my personality. So that was kind of tough. And I ended up making a few conversations with people, and this couple people did recognize you. One of the guys that recognized me the first day, he was actually not a flat earther, but he knows some flat earthers, and he was there for various reasons. And he introduced me to a few people, and that kind of broke the ice. And I found the people, for the most part, were very friendly, very open. And when they found out who I was and what I was doing there, well, they asked me, "Well, why are you here then?" And when they found out why I was there, they were delighted. They thought, "Well, here's somebody who we disagree with, but at least he's here trying to understand what we're all about." And they really appreciated that. And I since have kind of made friends with a couple of leaders in the movement. And I look forward, by the way, going back to the meeting next year. I really do. I want to maybe get a reputation as a guy who doesn't agree with them, but I'm a friendly adversary. I'm not this guy who's just going to castigate them and call them stupid, because I don't think they are. I think they're misled, and I want to help them. But if they want the help, but I'm not going to force myself. I go there to learn and to observe, and that's my attitude. If they want to discuss it, then that's fine. But again, I'm not going to do that in front of everybody there. That's not why I'm there. So I had a good time. I really did. And they couldn't have been nicer to me.
Well, yes, and actually it's been a long time, but I've talked to Rob Skiba before, and he's a very
Hmm.
nice, knowledgeable gentleman. Um, like I said, it's been a while. But yeah, a lot of these people are very nice and everything like that. And it's good to have knowledge, and it's good that you went there just to listen and to try to be helpful. I think that's great. For those of you listening, be sure and go to answersingenesis.org, and you can read many interesting articles there about creation and science and so forth in relation to the Bible, including articles by Dr. Danny Faulkner. So be sure and go check that out. And Danny, I just want to thank you again for addressing this and for agreeing to come on my show and to share your knowledge and information with the listeners. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
And for everyone listening, I will post the link to Answers in Genesis below the video. And also, I will post any links to any pertinent articles about this that Danny has posted on Answers in Genesis below the video as well, so that you can go check out those articles. Thanks again, Danny, and I appreciate it. God bless you.
You too.